Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Voiceflow tutorial video. Today we are going to be talking about utterances, slots, and intents. Now this is less to do with Voiceflow as it is to do with conversational design, also known as VUI design, or Voice User Interface design. Now the three big things you need to know about VUI design are utterances, slots, and intents. These are sort of the building blocks of conversational design in that they allow you to figure out what the user's intention is and then actually extract useful information out of that sentence and use it within your voice app. So the best way to describe this from a high level is your utterance is what the user says. The intention is breaking down what the user says to figure out what they want or what their intent is, and then breaking down the intent to find out what are the key parameters we need to use in order to fulfill the user's intention. I'm going to give one example and then we'll hop right into Voiceflow to run through a practical example on Voiceflow. So imagine you were Starbucks and you're building a voice app. What you would want to do is if the user said, "Hey Alexa, order me a large Pike Place coffee." That would be the user's utterance. That's what they said to the voice interface. You're going to want to break that further into an intent. You want to go, okay, what does the user want us to do from that utterance? And we're going to break down, say, order me, and we're going to realize, okay, the user's intention is to order or place a purchase. From there, we're going to say, okay, well, what are they trying to purchase? And these are the slots. This is breaking down the intent to figure out what are the useful pieces of information we can pull out of that intent to actually place the order. So in the case of Starbucks, that might be order me, which is the intent, a large Pike Place coffee. So type of beverage and size. And those are two slots that we are pulling out of that intent. To quickly recap, utterance is what the user says. Intent is the intention of what the user wants based off of the utterance, and then to fulfill the intention, to fulfill what the user wants, we need to pull out key pieces of information from the intent, and these are called slots. So we're going to hop into Voiceflow, and I'm going to run through a practical example, and by the end of this, you'll have a better understanding of what slots are, intents are, and how to use them not only in Voiceflow, but in general conversational design. All right, let's hop right in. So I'm going to create a project here, and I'm going to call this intent test. Actually, that might not be a good name. Let's call this slot test. And I'm going to choose the language I want. Okay, so here we are on Voiceflow. First thing we're going to do is set up or talk a little bit about what we want to do here. So I want to set up a very basic sort of intent structure where we're going to have two slots, name and city. And we're going to have the user give us their intention, which is just telling us their name and city. And so in this example, two slots, one intent, and by the end of it, we're actually going to pull out from a single sentence what their name and their city is and actually greet them by name and city. Normally, with a capture block, for example, you could only capture one piece of information at a time, but using slots and intents, we can capture many different pieces of information all from a single utterance or thing that the user says to the assistant all at once. So let's first ask the user our question here, and we're going to say, welcome to our voice app, welcome to our voice app, what is your name and city? Actually, that sounds a little bad. Let's say, what is your name and what city are you from? That's a little bit more grammatical. Okay, great. So now we're going to pull out the interaction block. So in the interaction block here, we're going to link this up. And the interaction block is split into choices, intents, and slots. You're not going to see utterances, even though it's a term we talked about before. That is what the user is saying to Alexa, and that's all hidden behind the scenes. That's all broken down and then matched to an intent. So our job as the designer is going to start at the intent level. And we're actually going to, in this case, we're not going to write our intent first, we're actually going to write our slots first. So we have two slots we want to do, name and city. So for slot 1, I'm going to say name slot, and this is going to be similar to the last video where we had the capture block. We are going to want to define what kind of data are we looking to capture with this slot. And the reason that we do this is because you can imagine if you just said Braden, which is my name, to Alexa, it would have no idea what that really means. You have to narrow down sort of a massive list of possible names for Alexa to then go ahead and match. So that's what we're doing with slots. We are narrowing down what's the data type and what are the millions of possible examples that it could be, and then from there Alexa is going to simply match from that list. And so in our case, we're going to go down to name, since we want Alexa to narrow down the slot type to a name. And I have a little bit of a weird name at Braden. It's not super common, at least the way I spell it. And so I'm actually going to add Braden as a slot type, or sorry, as an additional piece of this slot, so you can actually add on to the slot lists. You can imagine there's millions and millions of different first names inside of this slot type, and I'm just making sure that Braden is on there. And I will add a couple other variations of how Braden is spelled. Okay, great. So now we have our first slot type done. I'm going to close that up, and I'm going to create a new slot type for city. So I'm going to call this city slot. You go down to US city, and we're based in Toronto, so I'm actually going to add Toronto as a US city, just to be a little cheeky for this video. And I close this up here. Now, the intent that we want to define is going to have those two slots inside of it. And so this intent we're going to call the name and city intent. Name and city intent. And in here, we're going to list out the possible ways that a user might activate that intent. In other words, we're going to say all the different variations of how the user could essentially tell Alexa what their intention is, and then have the different combinations of slots within that. So the user might say, I am name. I'm going to use the square parentheses to pull open our slots from city. So that's one way to say it. They might say name from city, name from city. They might say, I am from city, and my name is slot. Okay, so that is those are a couple different ways a user could possibly hint what their intention is, and so we're actually going to close this intent up. Now, very similar to a choice block, what we're going to do is actually in the interaction block, you'll see there's a section called choices. We can add choice and then select which intent is going to activate which sort of numbered route. So name and city intent is going to be the number 1 port. And we've done this before with choice blocks and if blocks. It's the same system. If the user activates this number 1 intent, which is any of these combinations right here, then they're going to go down this port, else they're going to go down this port. And so let's quickly add the else here, and we're going to say, please say your name and city, just in case they don't give us the intent. Please say your name and city. And that will bring them back to the choice. So now we want to add what happens after the user says the intent and they give us the 2 slot types. Well, what we're going to have here is we actually want to say, nice to meet you, but how could we say their name? Well, similar to what we did in the last video, we can actually create a name variable and a city variable. And so we can say, nice to meet you, name from city. There we go. But you might be wondering, how do we map the slots to the variables? Because they're not the same thing. Well, we actually can go into our interaction block, and you'll see this little button right here for slot mapping. And what slot mapping allows us to do is to tell Alexa that this slot is going to be stored in this variable. So if the user gives us the name and city intent, they say, hi Alexa, I am from Toronto and my name is Braden, then it's going to activate that intent We are then going to pull out the two slots that we have defined, so name and city. Alexa is going to look for them, match them, and then find out which slot value from that massive slot list. And then the last step here that we are going to now do is, depending on what the value is, we're then going to put the slot value and store it in a variable. And there's reasons about why it's done this way, but I won't get into them in this video. Feel free to shoot me an email and I'm happy to chat about it. We can do add variable map here, and we can link the slot name to the variable name. And so we're just saying, Alexa, when you find out what the slot value is, put this in the variable. And we'll do the same thing for city slot. And we will put this in the city variable. Okay, great. So now this is our full interaction done. I'm going to run through it once, and then we'll actually go through and test it. So what we're doing here is we're saying, welcome to our new voice app. What is your name and what city are you from? The user is then, we only have one intent in this case, but the user then activates the name and city intent. Within that intent, we're looking for two slots, the name and the city slot. We have created these slot values. We have placed them within the intent and had a couple different variations of what the user might say. And then from there, we're going to map those slots into a variable. And lastly, we are going to then use those variables and say, nice to meet you, name from city. So let's actually run through it.
Welcome to our voice app. What is your name and what city are you from?
Braden from Toronto. It's taking a couple of seconds here.
Nice to meet you, Braden from Toronto.
And there you go. And so you can see that actually plucked out the two slot values, mapped them into a variable, and actually gave us access to use them. Again, why this is really valuable is if you're looking to pick multiple pieces out of a sentence, you can use slots to do so, which is better than having to ask users one by one for each piece of information. For example, we could have said, we could have had a speak block and then saying, what is your name? The user would have answered, we would have captured that, and then we would have had to say, okay, what is your city? And then they would have had to go another capture block and answer that. In this case, we combined all of that into one, created an intention, had two slots in it, and we were able to pick out crucial information in one step and store that in variables instead of having to do multiple different steps. And that's the value of slots and intentions. So I hope this was helpful. This was certainly a slightly more complex video than the last one. Voice user interface design can be a little tricky at times, but I'll put some helpful documentation in the description down below this video. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we are going to be talking about flows, which is the ability to have flow diagrams like the one you see above inside of other flow diagrams so that you can build really large, complex projects or have elegant solutions to short, simple interactions. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next video.